Good morning, everyone. It's absolutely delightful to be invited to this Nordic conference hosted by Iram, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues at Iram for inviting me to participate in a conference on diversity and possibilities for young children. My talk this morning is taken from the English ECERS project. And I want to show what the long-term impact is of quality and disadvantage on inequality, diversity, and how they intersect. As you've heard, I'm Siraj from the University of Oxford in the UK, but I'm also very fortunate to be an adjunct professor attached to Iram at the University of Stavanger. So what I hope to cover is the first part of the ECERS study, the first 5 years, where we looked at the development of 3 to 7-year-olds and look at the impact of that through the study. Now, the ECERS study stands for Effective Preschool Provision in England, and it became ECERS, the Effective Preschool, Primary and Secondary Education Study, because we followed the children from the age of 3 for 17 years. The second part that I'm going to focus on is the inequity gaps and understanding multiple disadvantage and the widening gap. And I want to focus a little bit here on things like gender and ethnicity, but when you take a more complex view of inequality, of diversity, you have to include other aspects of children's development and other background characteristics than just race, gender, and class. So I will also be focusing on the influences on children's development. So we'll be taking into account risk and protective factors, because there's not much point knowing about all the risks, because to a certain extent, we know this already from research in America, in Scandinavia, in Europe, and in other parts of the world. We know what doesn't work, and we know which children end up being disadvantaged. But we also want to focus on protective factors. What is it that supports children to succeed? And then maybe we can create better systems in early childhood, primary schools and beyond. So I want to link it to measuring quality for gender, ethnic and individual and family differences. So this is the design and sample. You know, the ECERS study, Effective Provision of Preschool Education, was a value-added study. That is, we controlled for background characteristics and we assessed children so that we could create a level playing field and see what preschool was adding to their development, and then primary school and then secondary, and also what home was adding. What's unique about our study is that it then looks at the interaction between home, preschool and primary to really begin to unpick and understand what's happening in terms of those children who succeed and those who don't, and the whys of it. So as you can see, our preschool is quite diverse in provision, and children were assessed at different points, different ages through the Learning Life course. We modelled later outcomes, so this is important now to diversity because we put in child factors like gender, if they had English as an additional language, family factors like social class and mother's education and so on. And we also measured the home learning environment, that is where the children had a low, medium or high home learning environment, what the parents were doing with them at home. And we also measured preschool quality. And I'll give an example of how we measured that using the ECERS and the STEW at the end of the study. We measured primary school and secondary school effectiveness. I'm going to focus more on these four and a bit on early primary school, because our preschool children have a curriculum for birth to 5, and in many Nordic countries it goes up to 6 or 7. So I'm going to include children in our early primary to include the 6 and 7-year-olds. And then we're going to look at the long-term outcomes as well. And because it's a 17-year study, I will only focus on 2 aspects of development, although we looked at numeracy and sociability as well. We'll focus on early language and literacy and some aspects of behaviour problems like self-regulation and externalising behaviours. Our sources of data are many, so it is really a very strong longitudinal study with lots of information on background characteristics that we could control for, information from staff, quality ratings of preschools and primary schools, and the kind of pedagogy. And later on, we also had children's views of their schools when they were old enough to tell us. But we're only going to focus on the first 4 here. So what is the equality gap? We normally start out by looking at gender. We often look at ethnic background because Norway and many of the Scandinavian countries like England have had an influx in the last 50 years of different ethnic minority groups and under different circumstances. Some moving from relatively affluent homes to our countries, and some actually coming as refugees or asylum seekers. We also have English as an additional language and poverty. Now, poverty includes low education, income, and socioeconomic status. And I want to talk a bit more about poverty later on, because I think it's a more complex concept in terms of diversity than we think. So here are, as I said, I focused on language and literacy and one aspect of social and emotional development and behaviour. So this is, I've called it independence and concentration, self-regulation, because they constructs that went through as we measured them from age 3 right through to 11. And we can see here that in terms of gender and children's outcomes, we can see that girls perform better than boys at the age of 3 as a group. It doesn't mean every girl performs better than every boy. These are statistical patterns amongst 3,000 plus children. So by the age of 5, this gap grows. Girls are somehow maturing or getting, and maybe early years, a very female profession, maybe girls are associating more with their teachers. And at age 7, there's a slight narrowing of the gap in language and literacy. But often that gap remains in terms of language and literacy. In terms of independence and concentration and self-regulation, again, the first 3 years are showing to be so important because they come in with a gap, and that gap remains pretty consistent. Here we have ethnicity, and in our country, we've got white UK and mixed heritage doing better than Black Caribbean, Black African and Indian, but you know, at 3, quite substantially. At 5, there's a lot of catch up because, you know, children have been exposed to English more. And at 7, we can see that although there's almost catch up for Indian and Black groups, Bangladeshi and Pakistani who have another language often are still behind. And later on we'll see they also tend to have poorer home learning environments. In terms of, this is more encouraging independence, concentration and self-regulation, which is a child's ability to think about their behaviour and to stop impulses and to be able to reason a bit more. We've got a better levelling by the age of 7, which is quite good news. English as an additional language, we can see that at the beginning we have lower scores for children who come in without the language of the preschool, a bit of catch up in preschool, and then in the early part of primary school, there's a big reduction. You can see that the English as an additional language children aren't able to sustain. Now, we did find that, for instance, Bengali children by 16 do catch up in a lot of subjects, but in terms of language and literacy, maybe they're still a little bit behind. In terms of self-regulation, again, it's better news because there's a bit more catch-up. Mother's qualification, this is interesting because in terms of language and literacy, we've got no official qualification up to 16, meaning, you know, GCSEs, O-levels, up to 18 A-levels, and then higher education. You can see where the mothers have a degree, there is a big jump and a sustained advantage compared to the other qualifications. So mother's education is very important, and a degree level qualification in particular makes a difference. And even in self-regulation, we're seeing a marked difference appearing at the age of 7. So mothers who have had graduate qualification, graduate level thinking, graduate level writing are obviously able to support their children's language and literacy and self-regulation in a more advantageous way. Social class, we can see that professional families, children are doing better even at age 3, and this increases as the children get older. And same with antisocial behaviour. There is more less antisocial behaviour in the children of professional classes compared to unskilled, unemployed, and that is really becomes quite exaggerated in difference by the age of 7. And this has implications for school exclusions, for disruption, and for the support that teachers need in schools where there are higher levels of children from skilled and unskilled families. I mean, if you're in a school, teaching in a school where 80% of the children are from professional backgrounds, you're going to have high levels of language and literacy in the primary school, very low levels of antisocial behaviour. But if you're teaching in a school that has more social class disadvantage, you could have low levels of literacy at 7 and very high levels of antisocial behaviour. That has implications for whether we can attract the best teachers into the most disadvantaged areas. So here we have multiple disadvantage, and we have no disadvantage here. 1 could be that you're a boy. 2 could be that you know, you have English as an additional language. 3 could be, you know, that you have some developmental delay, etc., low social class, etc. And you can see that when children have more disadvantages at the age of 3, they score much worse than children who have less disadvantages. By 7, it's very pronounced, and children with more diverse backgrounds with more disadvantage are getting very poor results. And what we found in our learning trajectories, the book I'll put up at the end that we wrote that looks at children's learning life course, many children get stuck in that trajectory at 7 till the end of school. And the book I'm going to refer to at the end studied the children who broke that pattern and succeeded against the odds. So there is hope there. I'm giving quite a grim and sad picture here, but really there's a lot we can do to support children to not be in these categories. Similarly, for independence and concentration and self-regulation, if you look at in our country the prison population, if you look in our country at young offenders, the vast majority are men, you know, so boys, you know, they're over 80%. The vast majority, over 70%, have literacy and numeracy problems, and even higher percentage have language issues and special needs. So multiple disadvantage indicators in terms of child characteristics. The disadvantaging indicator is when you start without English as a first language. Now, that could be an advantage, and it could be that our teachers are not qualified, sufficiently qualified, to take the benefits of children having more than one language or to support them effectively. Because did you do courses on how you work with a child who does not have Norwegian as their first language, or Danish or Swedish as their first language? How is it best to accelerate their learning of their home language and their Danish, Norwegian, Swedish? 3 or more siblings, and I'm speaking as someone who comes from a family of 8 children and ended up at the University of Oxford. You know, it's not a death sentence, you know, having English wasn't my first language either. But again, it's group patterns. So if you've got more than 3 children, large families, the children do less well. If children are premature or low birth weight. Now, this is an interesting one because this is a really big effect on children, especially if they're very low birth weight. If children are low birth weight, which is about 2,500 grams, they will catch up normally by 10, 11. If they're very low birth weight, under 1,500 grams, they tend not to catch up so easily and may display behaviors and illnesses which go with prematurity and very low birth weight, like asthma, eczema, and they might be more fretful, they might be might have more language problems. So knowing the background of children, once you get your records in a preschool, it's very important to know more than gender, ethnicity, and so on. Some health records are very important. Parent characteristics. Again, you know, mother's highest qualification compared to no qualification, but again, it's nuanced. There is a linear trajectory for the higher the qualification, the better the children do, but the best is a degree qualification. And again, being professional parents, children did better. Father's employment status, a young mother, usually teenage mother, a lone parent, single parent, and mother's employment status compared to unemployed. And again, the early home learning environment, being in the lowest quartile of it, was a really disadvantageous category to be in. And we'll learn a little bit more about the home learning environment. So the biggest attainment influences on the attainment gap are social class and parental education, poverty, and we measured poverty by free school meals, which is an indicator of poverty because children whose parents earn less and so on get free school meals. But I want to focus a little bit more on poverty. It's one of the biggest predictors of disadvantage and diversity. I think there are 2 parts to poverty. One is material poverty, and the other is social and cultural poverty. So you know, we often talk about a word gap in language and literacy. And my colleague, Catherine Snow at the University of Harvard, says it's not so much a word gap, it's a gap of knowledge of the world, because words and experiences like reading books give you knowledge of the world. And I would go further than that. I would add one more thing. I would say that that means you have less social and cultural capital. And this is something that we can give to children. We can help children out of social and cultural poverty, even if we can't get them out of material poverty. So that's very important to me. The home learning environment, again, we're in a unique position in the early years to support the home learning environment, because many parents, you know, spend more time with their children when they're little and might, you know, be out at work more as they get older. And of course, preschool education quality matters. And I will now demonstrate how some of these risk factors can also be protective factors, and what matters in there and what we can do about it. So here we have social class and preschool literacy at age 7. And these are the mean year 2 reading levels, and 2 is where a child is, if a child gets above a level 2 in reading, it means they're better prepared at the age of 7 for the challenges of the rest of primary school, okay? This line shows professional, skilled and unemployed semi-skilled parents, and you can see the children who had preschool improved, but the highest attainments are still amongst the professional group. The no preschool group, because we had a control group of children who didn't go to preschool and were just at home, and those children, the professional parents are still providing a better, those children are still doing better at school at age 7, but those who had no preschool, who were unemployed, semi-skilled or skilled, are doing much worse and are not prepared for the challenges of the rest of primary school. And that makes the life of primary schools difficult and the life of those children very difficult. The good news is that preschool benefits everybody. The good news is that it pulls the most disadvantaged above to face the challenges of primary school. The bad news is it doesn't close the gap. But there's good news because it benefits everybody and everybody pays taxes. But what we'd like to see, I mean, one way of narrowing the gap is to stop giving preschool to middle-class families. So they'd still be here and the preschool children would still be here. But how ethical is that? I don't know. You know, we have to think about that. But I think it is ethical to provide preschool for everybody as a basic entitlement, but special programs for children who have not had much experience of early education. This was the home learning environment that mattered. We asked a lot of questions, but this is what really mattered. It was reading to your child. The more you read, the better, taking them to the library, playing and teaching letters and numbers, and songs and nursery rhymes, drawing and painting, and playing with friends outside of home. Not all the time, but 2 or 3 times a week. When it was all the time, it went down again. Again, some of these, this is a proxy for structure and order in the home, really. So the early home learning environment, this was interesting. We found that the girls had a better early home learning environment than the boys. And that although there were professional families provided a stronger home learning environment, some skilled and unskilled did too, but generally it was, you know, higher in more middle-class families. And you can see in terms of home learning environment and different ethnic backgrounds, certain ethnic backgrounds provide a weaker home learning environment. And that means that that tells us something about who we might need to support when they start preschool. This is interesting because this is the lowest home learning environment. And this is low, this is medium, and then it's higher and the highest. And you can see we're questioning, do parents interact differently with boys and girls? Because there are twice as many boys in the low home learning environment as girls. So why are twice as many parents of boys giving a very low home learning environment, nearly half our sample? Medium is about the same. Now, it's not that we can't give a high home learning environment to boys, because over 100 parents did, but we've got twice as many girl children with the highest home learning environment. So we need to think about whether we have expectations of girls and boys to sit and read with us, to go to the library, that are different in homes. So again, the effect sizes, which show strength of influence on child attainment, net of all other factors. For instance, for language, the impact, the effect size for family SES, unskilled manual versus professional, is 0.54. It's a medium size, it's a good sized effect size. And then it's even higher for mother's qualification. And then the highest is for the highest home learning environment compared to the lowest. It's 0.85. It's a whopping great big effect size. And there's only a moderate association between HLE and parent socioeconomic status. That is, you know, it's 0.3. So this is interesting and very important for early childhood educators. Some parents with high social class and qualification levels actually provided quite a low home learning environment. And some parents with low social class actually provided a high home learning environment. So we can't stereotype, although we've got group effects, we also have diversity within each of the groups. Now, what happens in the long term? This is the crux. What impact are we having? How can we encourage our governments to support early childhood more? Because we know it makes a huge difference to children. Here, we've looked at high quality preschool, not medium or low. Now, at the age of 11, this is literacy and numeracy results. Red is literacy, and these are the effect sizes. Remember, that's the impact on children's attainment. Biggest impact was mother's education at the age of 11. The next was the home learning environment, especially on literacy. And high quality preschool is having as big an effect as primary school. And you have to remember, children have now had 6 years of primary school, and the high quality preschool is still having an impact within those primary years. And this is very important, self-regulation, you know, where we had low, where we had low, medium and high quality preschool, you can see children had better self-regulation and better pro-social behaviors. That is the ability to make friends, share, and so on. And here at the age of 16, we can see some changes. There's a big effect of secondary schools, as you'd expect. Mother's education and family income are important. Father's education is beginning to become important. Social class, home learning environment is still very important. And high quality preschool is still there. This is 12 years after the children have left preschool. Primary school is still having an impact, especially in maths, not so much in literacy, and secondary school is having a big impact. So what does it say about preschool quality being a protective factor, that's something we can do something about, and supporting the early home learning environment as well. Many of you will be familiar with the scales we used. We measured, if some people always ask, how did you measure quality? We used the same standardized scales with very well-trained researchers to look at these aspects in terms of quality. So in the ECERS, we had a lot on routines and childcare and some aspects of cognitive development like language reasoning. In the ECERS, which we developed, there was a lot more on the curriculum and the education side. And we measured each centre from inadequate to excellent in all of these categories, these 7 subscales and these 4 subscales. And the 7 subscales, I think, had 43 items, and the 4 subscales had something like 17 items. So there's a lot of good, clear measurement there. And we found a big association between the diversity subscale in the ECERS. This was the highest associated with child outcomes. Most people would have thought it would be literacy. Literacy was the second. And diversity looked at gender and race equality. It has 3 items, and meeting individual needs. So this is one item, meeting individual needs. And you can see inadequate is, if planning occurs, there's no mention of specific groups of individuals, records are kept, they described activities rather than the children's responses. They're little tick sheets. Minimum, which isn't bad education, but it's basic. Some additional provisions made for special needs. Some of the planning shows differentiation for activities and groups of children, and there are some records that indicate and show an awareness of how children cope with those activities, and staff show some awareness of need to support and recognise children's differences. Good is you can see the adults have really thought about the activities. The range of activities provided enable children of all abilities and backgrounds to participate in a satisfying and cognitively demanding way. Day-to-day plans are drawn up, children are observed regularly, individual records are kept on their progress, staff regularly draw attention of individuals to differences in a positive and sensitive manner. And excellent, this is maybe aspirational. The range of activities provided together with the organisation of social interaction enables children of all abilities and backgrounds to participate at an appropriate level in both individual and common tasks. So this is now really well thought out planning for individuals and groups to work within the zone of proximal development to stretch them. Planning shows attention to adult participation to individual, paired and group tasks. So the adult engagement and planning is much more sophisticated, and children are observed, their progress recorded, and staff regularly draw attention to the whole group to difference and ability in a positive way. I want to stop there because there's lots of food for thought, and I must be over my half an hour. I thank you for listening. Something on the positive side, we published a book from the EPSI study. We did a sub-study which explored the reasons why some disadvantaged children manage to succeed against the odds. And these child and family case studies looked at 50 children's backgrounds from early years, from birth onwards, and they and their families were interviewed between the ages of 14 and 16. We looked at the reasons why they succeeded, given their social class backgrounds. And these trajectories are reported in a book published by Cambridge University Press called Social Class and Educational Inequality, the Impact of Parents and Schools. And of course, the schools include preschools. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have an enjoyable conference, and I'm sorry I can't be there with you. If you have any questions, you have my email at the beginning of this presentation. Just email me.